Excellent. So if you've just joined us since the beginning, this is the Sunday where we do a longer extended time of sung worship in the second half of our gathering this morning. And so for the next half an hour or so, Kirsty is going to just share a few thoughts with us, and then we'll have a bit of a space for some community reflection using just the open mic for us to hear from a number of us at the end of Kirsty's sharing. And we're just thinking about how do we find joy? How do we find how can we be really fully human, fully alive, or find joy in the midst of this broken world in which we find ourselves, and as we journeying through troubled times personally or globally. And Kirsty, let's just pray for you, and then be good to hear what you have to share as a conversation starter for us today, just to think about this. So Father, we just thank you. We thank you for the way that Jesus navigated through some really troubled and broken times. And I thank you for that example and that model that we can learn from, that we can shape our lives, the teaching that might help us and impact us. And I thank you for the way that these stories are written in the scriptures that might guide us. And so pray for Kirsty as she just shares a few thoughts. And in the midst of what Kirsty shares, and then what maybe anybody else just shares afterwards, we might hear something of your invitation or your nudge or your encouragement or your challenge to us this morning. So give us also just ears to listen and attend to what you might be saying through the voices of others. Amen.
Okay, so reluctantly calling this "What would Jesus do?" or "What did Jesus do?" And I was thinking about this. The way I would describe this is, how do we live fully? How do we live fully in an imperfect world? And I was going to think, how did Jesus do that? And then I thought, is that a bit rude to Jesus to say, how did you live in this imperfect world? And he said, well, I made it, so it's not that imperfect. And then I watched a stand-up comic recently, and he came up with this thing about the 5 things that white people like. And one of them was museums. And he said he imagined white people go around museums going, yep, I did that, we did that, that's us, we had that, that's very nice. And so they feel very pleased with themselves walking around museums. And so I was thinking, maybe, how did Jesus walk around the world? I think it must have been tempting for him to, walking along with the disciples and notice a tree and go, I made that? What do you think? Pretty good, huh? And look at the birds. Pretty good. I did that. That was me. See the mountains? My idea. I did that. I don't think he did that, but I think it might be quite fun to think of him feeling quite happy with himself as he walked around the world that he created. However, there is brokenness, and we did that. So Jesus lived in this world. What an amazing thought. God himself, fully God, fully human, as Bella mentioned last week. How amazing that he actually did that. How did he do it? How did he live with people, loss, friendship, betrayal, success, failure? And what can we learn from him about how to navigate these things? What have we learned from him about living well? What did we see him doing? And what did his teachings offer us? How does the example of Jesus help us live our lives and to live fully here and now, to help us on our Monday mornings, at our work, with our friends, with our families? Jesus seemed to live joyfully, patiently, resourcefully, purposefully. How did he do that? So there's an entire 4 Gospels and the entire Bible to get this from. So I've just picked out a few things that I've noticed on reading the Gospels that I think help me. And it's a few gleanings, and there's so much more. And there's going to be an invitation, as we said, and a space for you to offer things that have been helpful to you. So I am going to start with blessed or cursed. That's my first point. And sorry there's no slides, but I'm not going to be here that long, hopefully. So here today, this morning, I'm not going to be not predicting something weird going on. Sorry, I'm not a stand-up comic. I am trying to give a sermon here. The Beatitudes from Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, my lovely husband did a sermon on this some weeks ago, so he did a very in-depth understanding or dive into the Beatitudes, and they're so rich and full. And I'm not doing that. I'm purely looking at this word blessed. And in a number of these sentences, they're followed by something that isn't too great to experience. But the word is blessed beside something difficult. So I think there is a tendency, and there was very much a tendency in those days, and Jesus pointed this out on a number of occasions, to assume that if something was going wrong in life, then they'd done something wrong. There was a sin. There was an absolute cause and effect. If something was going wrong in your life, you'd done something wrong and God had done it to you. And if it was going well, you'd done things right and they were blessed. And Jesus challenged that on a number of occasions. In Luke 13, it's just sort of in passing, but he mentions this tower of Siloam where 13 people died. And he said, was it for their sin? No, it wasn't. It just happened. And there was a man born blind, and John's a long, very amusing story. And he's born blind, and they say to him, well, Jesus, was it his sin or was this his parents' sin? And he says, it's not about sin. This wasn't caused by their sin. So he's challenging this idea. And I think here we see it so strongly in the Beatitudes. But I was curious, I was thinking, well, that was their thinking. But there was also, in the Old Testament, we had the book of Job, which surely challenged this idea. And the book of Job, this man Job, terrible things happened to him, catastrophic, all his entire life. And his friends gather beside him as he's sitting in mourning, and they sit with him and they go, Job, just repent because you've done something wrong here. I went, no, I didn't. I didn't do anything wrong. And they go, but you did. Look at what's happened to you. You must have done. Think hard. You must have said something or done something. And Job said, no, I didn't. I didn't do anything wrong. Now, this conversation goes on for chapters and chapters and chapters. This round and round and round. And it is clear that Job has some business to do with God, but it is true that he hadn't done anything to deserve it. And although the book of Job has many, many depths of meaning, I think it was clear there was a message there that it's not cause and effect. But people didn't seem to get it, and I think we don't get it. I think there's a tendency to go back to somehow we've done something or we deserve or it's our fault. And I think nowadays we don't have this. In general, people don't think cursed or blessed by God, but they do think it's somehow at fault. They're at fault. Now, there's a book I read many years ago called Status Anxiety by a guy called Alain de Botton. Now, he's an atheist, but he wrote this book called Status Anxiety. His premise is we all live with anxiety, and he thinks it's about status. And we've all got this idea that we should be one step above the ladder where we're at. So we all think we should be here. We should have a little bit more. We should have a better job. We should have a better home. We should have a better something. And we look up and we go, that's where I should be. And the reason it's so anxiety-inducing is because we feel it's our fault that we're not there. Because of meritocracy, we think everyone gets what they've worked for, so if I haven't got up here, then somehow I'm to blame or something. It looks bad. It's shame. Shame is in there. And we go back to this as societies, I think, over and over again. I wonder why. I wonder if it's about we want to feel we're in control, and somehow if I can prevent it, if I could do something, then it won't happen again. So it gives us some sense of control. But it's a false idea. And it causes shame, it causes extra pain for people who are in difficult times. And I think where I am. And I think but this is not what Jesus is saying. He's saying blessed. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Even if things go badly for me, I am still loved. I am still of worth. I am not cursed. I am still blessed by God. I often encourage people to do a self-compassion exercise where I go, and it's so, this is a whole theme of part of a mindfulness way of thinking. But it's so embedded, if you're a Christian, it's so real and true and embedded in the love of God. Because whatever's happening with you, whatever you're doing, whatever's going on for you, you are loved. You're of immense worth. And you're seen. And there's no need for shame. Now realize there are circumstances that we have cause. There is cause and effect. There is actions and consequences. But there's also just life and the world and things happening. In CBT, which I've trained in, are the premises that our despair is not because of what's happening, but it's because we believe what's happening. And if we believe that our circumstances are a source of shame, then it makes it so much worse. So I think that's one way of living more fully and more calmly and more and better, that if we can remember that we are loved, even if things are hard. So my next point is about Jesus says, do not judge. So these points aren't particularly connected with each other. They're just random thoughts, so hopefully that's okay. So I'm thinking about how we navigate a world in which we think a lot of other people are badly in the wrong. And I think the problem is we end up living in camps. There were protests this weekend, and it had to be in London, I think it was massive police presence. I don't know how they went, actually, but two opposing groups were going to clash on the streets of London. And I've seen pictures, I've seen images of these people, and people just go absolutely berserk, and they yell in each other's faces, and they throw and hurl insults at each other. And I think we can end up very much othering others and saying, that group of people, they believe wrong things and they're bad. And we end up angry and we end up separated from people. So how do we not allow ourselves to be consumed with anger over other people's feelings? And how do we not maybe because I think we can enjoy othering others. But othering and putting people over there in a camp gives us no space for conversation, for understanding. It can paralyze us and unable to move towards. We won't experience the healing and reconciliation and changing one another if we live in complete judgment. So Jesus points out that we are lacking in our awareness of ourselves. And the most important thing that we can do is pay attention to our own feelings and our own selves and our own need for improvement, and not to completely focus ourselves on others. So this is not to say that we don't call people out. Because it's hard to think, was Jesus being judgmental when he called people a brood of vipers or hypocrites? He could get very angry and very pointed out when he saw things wrong. So I don't think it's about not calling people out. But there's something about living in a space where we're not judging. I think it helps us to live in peace with ourselves and other people. It helps us to maintain sanity in a complicated world. So I feel like not judging. One of the things I forgot to say when I was talking about Alain de Botton, when he was talking about his status anxiety, he also, the second part of his book is he offers consolations towards the status anxiety. And interestingly, as an atheist, he says, one of the consolations, one of the groups of people that seem to counteract that anxiety is Christians. So he has an interesting view of faith, quite a positive view of faith. So I think not judging is a consolation, it's an antidote to being consumed with anger and indignation and remaining separated from each other. And I think it's a block to bringing about change and peace. So my last point is a little bit like it. And I guess it's two different things, and I'm sure you could say a huge amount of these separately, but I'm putting them together. This is about loving your enemies and forgiveness. So how did Jesus do it? A lot of people hated Jesus. They turned against him. And yet he lived well and kind of brightly, and he really seemed to enter life, it seems, happily. And I think the only way he could have done this, it was a massive gift of loving those who hate him and forgiving. I mean, Jesus knew everyone. He knew their hearts. He knew what was going to happen. Obviously we don't have to live with that burden. But, and yet he could live so present to people. And Judas, how did he live and invite that man to be one of his closest friends when he must have known what at least might happen? I hope it wasn't an inevitability. But he loved him anyway. I think I was just remembering this. This is a long, long time ago, and it just came up because I was talking to Rupert the other day, and this memory came up, and I'd forgotten all about it. But decades ago, I went with, I think Colin Symes organised it. A group of us went down to the Meadows during the Meadow Festival to do a bit of evangelism. I think we were singing or something. I don't know why I went, I can't sing, so it probably wasn't very inviting for everyone. But we were standing in the meadows. I remember standing in the middle of the meadows, and all that beautiful blossom was out, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And then there was groups of people walking around. I don't know if those festivals where there's lots of tables and there's people wandering around. Now, as a bit of an introverted person, large crowds are a bit off-putting for me. And also, I think I was being a little bit judgmental. I think it's all very new agey, and I was feeling, this is really, not feeling very positive about all these people. And I think, but how beautiful, what a mess this is, and how beautiful the trees are. And it was really strong feeling. God said to me, excuse me, the people are more beautiful to me These people that you're looking down on or judging are more beautiful to me than the blossom. And I was kind of awestruck by how deeply he loves. And he doesn't look at everybody's sin and complications and what they have done and what they might do. He just sees them as beautiful and loving, and he loves them. I find it quite extraordinary. And I don't think we can do that in the way he does, but there is an invitation to love. I also think with forgiveness, I realise these are really big subjects that could be delved into, and I'm touching them very lightly. So what about forgiveness? I think there's something about letting go that sets us free. It gives us an attitude that enables us not to be consumed by anger or to live completely in the pain of the harm that's done to us. So Jesus didn't deserve hatred. It wasn't okay, but he seemed to live with it without it running his life or without it ruining his life. He really chose to forgive all of those people that did him harm. And I do think that is an invitation to how he managed to live in the present without sort of just being, consumed by rage. So let me be clear, I think forgiveness is a process. It's not done in an instant. It never means not calling out wrong. And it certainly doesn't mean staying in harm's way. And if a friend or someone in a relationship with you is harming you or harming us, we are not called to stay there. We're not, and it's not trusting someone who is untrustworthy. So I think it's not calling out, it is, we still call out what we see as wrong. Jesus was biting in his criticism at times and never hesitated to say what he saw as wrong. But he seems he could live in his own truth and not be so impacted with others' anger and with others' wrongdoing. So he was living out of his truth and not out of their truth. He truly loved everyone and asked for forgiveness for them. And I think this enabled him to live fully without the massive burden of what everyone else is doing and what everyone else does. So those are my 3 things. We are blessed, and I think it helps us to stand. We are still loved, we're valued and seen, even if things are going wrong with, and that's what Jesus said about us. I think not judging enables us to move towards other and not live so separated from those we disagree with. Our invitation is to maybe not sort other people out, but to sort ourselves out. And to love and to forgive sets us free to live without the burden of living in the wrongdoing of other people. So, what is it about Jesus' life and words that have helped you live well in a broken world? So we're just going to open things up, and I'm wondering what has helped you. And Rupert asked me to get this question clear because he loves clarity. What is it about Jesus' life and words that have helped you live well in a broken world?
I'm afraid it's not quite the direct answer to the question, but this just came up for me in response to something you were saying. I'd thought I might share it last week, but no. A week past Saturday, I was having an awful day, and through one thing and another, I found myself having an unexpected walk to a post box, trying to get there really fast. I'd forgotten my phone, and I felt slightly exposed from that, and I didn't have a coat, and it started to rain. And I was already feeling a bit bad, and I thought, okay, God, I feel quite vulnerable now, emotionally, but also physically, and you must be saying something to me. Anyhow, I had to walk past a primary school, and I noticed on the ground a gold star. And I just felt God saying to me, and I knew it was for more people than just me. Every day we kind of judge ourselves, and in a way that's just part of being human. We think, I did that well, I didn't do that well, I want to do this better, I must do that, all these things. And he said, but I always put a gold star on your chart. You might think, you might see it as a star chart with different coloured stars, and this is good and this is much better. Or you might see it as like a graph. I'm up here, I'm down here. But if you picture that of your life, every day there's a gold star, there's a gold star, there's a gold star. You're a gold star person. And it really helped kind of pull me up, but I think it's something that you have to consciously tell yourself and think about. Because we're going to go on thinking, I didn't do that very well. But no, there's a gold star.
Thank you, Alison. That's just lovely. We were blessed. We have a gold star.
There's a couple of things, but one thing Jesus said that helps me think through some of these things Kirsty brought up is give to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what's God's. I think there's a lot of divisive conversations and people trying to trip you up, or even like other people trying to make other people look silly. And I think that verse really cuts to the heart of how we're meant to be in the world, but not of it. And how, you have to participate in society, and you have to be kind and also compliant. But that doesn't mean you're like owned, because God's sovereignty reigns over. So that's helped me, and like recurringly came up in my mind in lots of conversations with lots of people that where a lot of division is stirred, but Jesus walked a path where he was still a part of society and subject to it, and yet he was still God.
Lovely. Thank you, Nick. Sean.
I was thinking about the words Jesus said, where he says, you will find trouble in this world, but take heart. And it reminded me of sort of significant period where I realized what had crept into my thinking was that in some way, this has happened from a young age, that somehow as a Christian I would be immune from hardship, immune from catastrophe. And I think that was partly to do with maybe a misunderstanding about the word protection. That what's been offered me and us is being accompanied by Jesus through life and its difficulties and also its joys. And I found that very grounding. But I also found then that it actually became a bit of a springboard for me to then see that all of us on this earth are in the same boat. And I found that very opened the possibility of more compassion and empathy than I had before. Just again coming back to this idea of Jesus saying, take heart.
Can I share something?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, thanks. I'm in my comfort zone now. rather than, where kids go and all that stuff. So I was thinking about a verse in Luke's, 2 verses in Luke's Gospel, where Jesus has just healed somebody with leprosy, and he tells this person not to tell anybody, and they go and tell everybody. And the text says, the report of his power, or his miracles, spread even faster, and vast crowds come to hear him preach and to be healed of their diseases. And you go, oh, that must have been cool if I was Jesus. And the very next word that it says is, but Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness. And the more I kind of thought about the crowds coming round, actually, I was thinking, no, maybe that isn't really cool. Actually, there's a lot of trouble that comes with crowds. And they all want you to perform miracles and all the rest. And so there's something about Jesus often withdrawing that seems really helpful in the midst of the world in which he was inhabiting. And so I've been thinking quite a bit about what I'm calling micro practices, just small practices in the middle of the crowdedness of day. So just thinking about your list, Sarah, that you were saying earlier on. It may not be possible to withdraw for a long time, or even, but we could probably find 30 seconds several times a day just to ground ourselves in some way that might just change our relationship with all that's happening around about us. So that's what I was thinking a little bit.
Nice. So it's comforting. I mean, I don't mean this frivolously, but it's quite comforting for maybe introverts who say, the pinnacle isn't always being in vast numbers of people, but actually Jesus had to do both the being with people, which I'm sure he loved, but also he needed space and time by himself. I think that it always remarks how human Jesus was, and and I find that interesting.
And I guess if you think about it, he must have felt the burdens of all the people that were coming. And I guess that must be true for all of us, that we experience the burdens of life in different ways, whether that's personally or globally or in the therapy room or wherever it is. And that need to just find a place where we're grounding ourselves, recentering, reorientating ourselves. It's one of the reasons why I think gathering together is so helpful. It's not to learn something new necessarily. Might be. Fantastic. But I feel the need to reorientate my life regularly around Jesus because I'm being pulled away all the time by the burdens.
It strikes me, maybe a slightly different thing, but why I was saying Jesus loved calls us to love, but we need to be loved too. So this mixture of coming back to being loved and finding a place where you're loved and sinking into being loved to enable us to love. And we need the two sides of that.
Yes.
And even Jesus seemed to dwell in those two sides.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I know Joe said, don't have to read this out, but Joe's put on chat, all will be well, says Julian of Norwich, who's a mystic. Really? Says Joe. Have you seen my life? What's happening to me? Yes. And I have something to say. All shall be well. And I exhale, and I stop, and wait, and I breathe, and I begin to hear. Yes, and one more thing. All manner of things shall be well. And I begin to see differently, anew. That's just lovely, Joe. I think you should join Susie's poetry workshop on Wednesday. Shall we just have some space? Is this okay if we move on now, Kirsty? Shirley, I wonder if you could come up with the band. So there's some